Assalamualaikum. My name is Siti binti OSMAN. My metric number is 261135. I will be presenting about my individual assignment. The title of my individual assignment is Corruption in the Public Sector of Malaysia. So this is a table of contents. I will explain you guys about first is introduction and second is literature review. We have types of corrupt behavior, corruption globalization, lesson to fight against corruption, and third is discussion, and lastly is the conclusion. So, the first part I will explain is introduction. For my assignment, I choose the topic of corruption in the public sector of Malaysia. As island management ethic, I do some observation on the corruption issues. Actually, I want to do general, but I think smaller scope is better to find the resources. So I choose corruption issue in Malaysia, and there are a few cases that are very popular. Two cases that I'm interested are the Sabah State Water Department and One Malaysia Development Berhad, which is 1MDB. So I will explain about Sabah State Water Department. Sabah State Water Department is on the cases on 2015 to 2016. It was a widespread investigation by the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission (MACC) over the alleged abuse of power inside the Sabah State Water Department. This case resulted in the arrest of two senior officers along the businessman and his accountant. The total confiscation is 114.5 million ringgit in Malaysia, and it became the largest ever confiscation by the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission. Furthermore, the investigation revealed that there are another 30 million ringgit Malaysia in foreign banks with a money trail leading to Australia and New Zealand. For over 5 years, the two suspects have taken 60% of state funds channeled by the federal government that supposedly been used for water supply work. Others, a case that shocked Malaysia people and became a major issue until now, is the One Malaysia Development Berhad, or we call it as 1MDB. In 2015, Malaysia's Prime Minister Najib Razak was accused of channeling to his bank accounts over 2.67 billion ringgit Malaysia, roughly about $700 million, from One Malaysia Development Berhad. 1MDB is a government-run strategic development company masterminded by Low Teck Joe, or referred commonly as Joe Low. So with many calling for Najib Razak's resignation, including Mahathir Mohamad, one of Najib's predecessors as Prime Minister, who later defeated Najib in the 2018 general election and returned to power. This event sparked widespread criticism among Malaysian people. To these cases, we can see corruption is a major problem in Malaysia. So based on the corruption statistics that I found, in the year 2011 to 2019, the graph is non-monotonic, which the index unstable, and the highest around that year is 53 points, stated by the trading economy. The lowest point around the year 2011 to 2019 is 43 points. Following the statistic, Malaysia kept increasing year by year, and that induced more recession in our country. Nowadays, many companies facing corruption because it became the norm around the business organization. So the government must tighten the law and create awareness of the business organization about the effect of corruption. Next, I will explain you guys about literature review. First is about definition. Corruption is commonly characterized as the misuse of untrusted authority for undue private benefit. It reflects the exploitation for the private or personal benefit of public power or organizational resources and is widely understood by any group to be highly undesirable. Asid Nathaniellah also noticed that corruption was seen as an extra-legal institution that people and organizations used to gain control over the bureaucracy's action. Moreover, I'll explain you guys about types of corrupt behavior and corruption globalization. So for types of corrupt behavior, there have two types, which are grand and also petty corruptions. These two are often differentiated. So grand corruption refers to illegal acts perpetrated by government leaders and senior civil servants, typically involving large-scale international bribery and secret foreign bank accounts. On the other hand, for petty corruption, it entails poorly paying low-ranking civil servants seeking bribes from those they represent as a coupling approach to help their families to speed up their applications or do other favors. Moreover, these two levels were both tend to be synonymous with the same sense. In short, corruption is due not only to individual greed, but also to weak state institutions, powerful policies of patronage, and persistent private networks. Besides, for corruption has included globalization, which now raises the possibility for corruption and the challenge of regulating it. Because of the technology right now, it becomes easier for companies to take out the money or flow the money across borders and money laundering affecting that will affect many countries. For instance, the 1MDB scandal in Malaysia clearly shows the severe consequences when government officials and banks do not follow the strict rules preventing money laundering. So according to the Corruption Index (CPI) of Transparency International, corruption continues to be a prevalent and influential global phenomenon in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Next is the lesson to fight against corruption. So there are three. First is the need for effective internal auditing and management controls. Second is watchdog and investigative agency in Malaysia. And lastly is banks in Malaysia and other jurisdictions. So the lesson from the preceding study in the fights against corruption is that government response to a corruption scandal represent not only its political to fight corruption, but also the perceived magnitude of the country corruption in the public sector. So first, the need for effective internal auditing and management control for public entities participating in major investment programs. Such controls can ensure that information submitted to the board of directors relating to the feasibility of investment ventures, sources of funds, and cash disbursement is accurate to ensure that government bond issues guarantee that underwriting fees and bond prices are similar to market rates, and where possible, avoid private placement. Action should be taken in this regard to identify whether there has been bribery in setting fees and bond rates and choosing investor in a private placement pool. Furthermore, it is important to exercise control through a stringent verification procedure over remittances of money to outside bank accounts and whether such remittances are intended to finance approved project. Such control can reduce the loophole that embezzle catch. Second, watchdog and investigative agency in Malaysia. Watchdog and investigative in Malaysia, such as the Malaysian Anti-Corruption Commission (MACC), the National Audit Department, and the Attorney General's Chambers, must be protected from political interference. Such interference can only be prevented if there are safeguards, both against pressure on such agencies to water down reports and remove evidence compromising certain high-level individuals in government, and also against restriction on the availability of such report to the public, the media, and the parliament. Likewise, investigative and judicial staff should be protected against dismissal or harassment to stop them from pursuing an investigation or engaging in a prosecution. Corruption is widespread in many Asian countries because many corrupt political leaders, senior civil servants, business persons, and citizens resist and subvert the implementation of comprehensive anti-corruption reform to address the causes of corruption to protect their vested interests. Anti-corruption efforts in Malaysia are rife-ridden and ineffective because of the lack of political will, failure of proposed initiative to address the cause of corruption, duplication, and a lack of public support for corruption prevention. Lastly, banks in Malaysia and other jurisdictions must conduct rigorous checks when transferring large sums of monies from a public entity to ensure that the reimbursement is for a valid purpose to finance an approved project. Also, in the receiving banks, whether in Malaysia or abroad, due diligence should be practiced to recognize the names of the recipient, account holders, and the true intent for which the money was transferred to uncover money laundering. In this respect, internal enforcement requirements for money laundering in Malaysia banks and those in other jurisdictions should be strengthened and strictly adhered to by the State Financial Service Regulator or Central Bank, or in Malaysia we call it as Bank Negara, that monitor compliance with both compliance standard and anti-money laundering laws in Malaysia. To reach it, the government can track public officials by electronic means. This electronic means has been imposed in many countries. These are the new methods for monitoring public servants' enforcement, and results can help to avoid some of the usual detection of avoidance practices. In public institutions where participation is lack, organizations should install online biometric monitors to minimize defection. An employee can register his or her fingerprint for electronic scanning instead of signing in. At headquarters, the department will match the fingerprints with its document. Failure to electronically sign in will provide grounds for docking the pay of an absent employee without permission. Furthermore, is about discussion. I agree with the corrupt behavior mentioned in paragraph 2 based on my report, which makes corruption in Malaysia growing. For improper private benefit, the high levels of government misuse their delegated power since power is usually correlated with state governance. Corruption is mainly regarded as a term relevant to public policy. They misuse their opportunity to raise money that was not for them and had a negative influence on society. There was a mindset in high places in the government and private sector in Malaysia that found unethical practices to be reasonable and to be interested in major financial profits when opportunities arose. So because of the mindset, I think that the money embezzled would include organizations that are unable to make main debt servicing payments. Organizations that have been involved in corrupt activities historically are more likely to be subject to economic extortion. Moreover, I would like to suggest to avert corruption increasing in Malaysia. So there are three suggestions that I would like to suggest. To begin with is creating awareness among the new generation, like university students, that will become the leader of this country. University should become a primary factor in education by organizing a campaign that shares information about the pros and cons of corruption in organizations. Students should aware that knowing corruption can make them choose the right thing when facing this dishonesty crime. Furthermore, they invigorate citizen demands for anti-corruption and legitimize them to hold government office is a sustainable approach that helps to build mutual trust between citizens and government. Lastly, is the corruption prevention procedure needs to be ingrained and implied by everyone in the organization. Here is where an anti-bribery training curriculum of high quality is crucial. Education is not just about individuals to understand whether or not it is permissible to need to integrate the appropriate behaviors, but most importantly, it's important to note that integrate aspects of the Bribery Act, clauses, and all don't need to be revealed by your employees. Instead, in daily circumstances they can come across. They need to consider the human impact of bribery and what their particular roles are to help deter bribery. This brings true sense to preparation, and workers will be far more likely to remember their roles and behave in the right way. Lastly is the conclusion. For the conclusion, corruption continues to be a prevalent and influential global phenomenon according to the Transparency International Corruption Index. Worryingly, over two-thirds of the world nations have fallen below the CPI midpoint, and as of 2017, the global average is 43. In other words, there has been a global trend for more countries to decline, to be seen as more oppressive rather than developing. Malaysia high levels of government and private sector misuse their delegated authority. They misuse their chance to raise money that had a negative impact on society and was not for them. In terms of decreased confidence in corporate governance, dishonest action of workers, skewed efficiency of internal process, and negative spillover of credibility while working overseas, business engaged in illegal practices face high indirect costs. So to prevent corruption increasing in Malaysia, a high-quality anti-bribery training curriculum is crucial. It is important to note that it is not necessary to reveal to your staff the complex aspect of the Bribery Act clauses and all. So that's all from me. Thank you.